I've spent the last few weeks assembling a compilation of viewer reactions to Robin Hood Men in Tights, at the link in the upper right and in the description. And since it was a direct parody of Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, I got to thinking about just how close they were to each other. This led to wondering how similar older movies might have been and how closely any of them follow the original medieval legends. So that's what I'm doing. I assume I'll be biting off more than I can chew, but here we go anyway. So,
let's get ready to rumble!
In this corner, wearing red trunks, the films. The 20th century brought us 21 films centered on Robin Hood. I'll be including 5 of them as examples. 1, the silent 1902 classic Robin Hood, starring the legendary Douglas Fairbanks. 2, The Adventures of Robin Hood, in 1938, starring Errol Flynn, which most people, at least those over 30, consider to be the definitive Robin Hood movie. 3, Disney's 1952 The Story of Robin Hood and His Merry Men. I'm including this because we need something between 38 and 91, and I like Richard Todd. 4 and 5, Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991, and 1993's Robin Hood, Men in Tights, Mel Brooks's parody of the Costner film. There are many others, but they are not really canon or contribute to the lore. There were 5 silent shorts from 1908 to 1913 and 16 features between 1922 and 1993. During the 38 to 93 period, we have 2 movies about the son of Robin Hood in 46 and 50, and one about his daughter in 1958. 1948 brought the first Prince of Thieves, loosely based on a novel by Alexandre Dumas père, which was actually a French translation of an English novel by somebody else, translated back into English for the film. 1951, Robert Lippert gave us Tales of Robin Hood. Lippert was one of the leading lights of 50s B-movie cheese. I can't imagine what this would have looked like. Then a series of 4 movies from Hammer Films, the British horror specialists, in 54, 60, 67, and 69. Believe it or not, a soft-core porn version called The Erotic Adventures of Robin Hood in 1969. The 70s gave us the Disney animated version in 73 and Robin and Marian in 76, starring Sean Connery and Audrey Hepburn as our favorite couple in their later years. Based on The Death of Robin Hood, a ballad not normally included in most retellings, but with a twist. It featured a lot of big-name actors. The Merry Men laid low until 1991, when they showed up twice. First, of course, was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which was not associated with the 1948 film of that name. Then there was Robin Hood, a British-German production which did not have a theatrical release in the U.S., and they knew they couldn't compete with Kevin Costner. Then the movie that started this whole project, Robin Hood Men in Tights, in 1993. Also, interestingly, a re-edit of 3 episodes of the 1955 to 1959 Robin Hood TV program into a feature-length presentation. Depending on your source of information, there may have been 3 of these compilations, but released between 1991 and 1995. I've only found 1. There are 3 more after 2000, but I'm not concerned with those. Nor are we touching upon the myriad of Robin's television appearances. And in this corner, wearing green trunks, the legends. And here are the original stories. Outside of maybe a half dozen names, there is little, if any, connection between the 20th century films and the original 14th and 15th century legends. The main differences are that they did not take place at the time of King Richard, and they mostly did not take place in Sherwood Forest. Usually. That's a problem when you're dealing with material 700 years old. Lots of people with their own agendas have had a crack at them. Now, the simple story is that the first written reference to Robin Hood was in the poem called Piers Plowman in 1377. It's only a passing mention, but it indicated that there were earlier oral traditions. But since we could never know what oral stories may have existed, my comments will concentrate on pen and paper. Individual texts of the actual tales go back to around 1400 and continue throughout the 15th century. Original, the merry men, were Robin, his right-hand man, Little John, who has quite a legendarium himself, a man we know as Will Scarlet, but whose name was given in a number of somewhat similar forms, and someone known as Much the Miller's son. Minstrel Allen a Dale came in a little later. There's no Maid Marian or Friar Tuck as of yet. But the bad guy was already the Sheriff of Nottingham, along with a variable character named Guy of Gisborne. Now, somewhere in the late 15th century and into the 16th, the stories seem to have started becoming more related to Sherwood, and Marian and Tuck came upon the stage. And it wasn't until 1521 that King Richard emerged, and there's no mention of Robin being off on the Crusades with him. We can skip most of the details of the intervening years. In 1795, Joseph Ritson took it upon himself to collect all these stories and poems into one volume. And Professor Francis James Childs did likewise in 1888, in a much more detailed and frankly overly academic manner. Ritson was one of his sources. For our purposes, the 1884 edition of Ritson's work will suffice as source material, along with a couple of modern books that translate the Middle English and explain the references. The 1883 book, The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle, which is basically a modernization and simplification of Ritson's book, obviously was the source for all the 20th century movies. Okay, we have our opponents. Now, what do we do with them? Compare the movies? Take a scene from one of them and try to find a legend to support it? Or do the opposite and take a tale and try to find a celluloid version? Or some mixture? After a lot of thought and a good night's sleep, I've decided on the mixture. This journey began with Men in Tights and its relation to Prince of Thieves, so that's how we'll proceed. Comparing the two movies and adding content and commentary from and about the other films and the legends as they become relevant. So, grab your bows and arrows, your feathered caps, and let's go. First, let's take a second to set up our workplace. In your lower left, you'll be watching Prince of Thieves, and in the lower right, Men in Tights. I'll be peeking in from the upper right, and the large blank space will be for the other films and any images or other information I want to present. And for simplicity, I'll refer to the 5 films as Fairbanks, Flynn, Disney, Thieves, and Tights. Okay? Okay. Now, roll 'em! We'll skip being told who paid the bills and go right to the credits, where we have 2 issues right off the bat. One is the scene about
There must be another way of doing the credits. That's right. Every time they make a Robin Hood movie, they burn our village down.
Sorry, Mel, totally wrong. None of the others have a burning village. Fairbanks, being a silent film, merely had standard title cards. Flynn had much the same, only more ornate. And Disney used the technique of presenting the text as the title page in a book, dissolving into text over the video. The other issue is that Thieves inexplicably did their credits over a background of a recreation of the Bayeux Tapestry, which is a representation of the Norman invasion at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, and has nothing at all to do with Robin Hood, and happened 120, 130 years before King Richard. Now, here's a picture of the real thing. Now, to be fair, Thieves did have a burning village, but it was about 3/4 of the way into the movie and nothing to do with the credits at all. Now it gets really weird. Yes, King Richard went off to the Crusades, but there's absolutely no mention in the legends of Robin going as well. And for that matter, there's no mention of Richard in the original saga either. So everything these guys are singing about is part of the alternate history and not to be taken seriously. Disney gives us a more traditional minstrel ballad with Alan a Dale strolling through the greenwood, strumming his lute. Therefore, no prison, no torture, no escape, no Moorish companion. None of these seem to have appeared before Thieves, except the 1984 British TV show Robin of Sherwood does include a Saracen. But the backstory is totally different. So, if we don't have a prison, etc., how do the other movies start off? Well, the Fairbanks version begins with a tournament celebrating the brave knights who were about to set out on the crusade. Among them, the Earl of Huntingdon and Sir Guy of Gisborne. Flynn starts off with some backstory title cards, which, notwithstanding the time period, are true. It is announced that Richard was taken prisoner by Leopold of Austria on his way home. Also true. Captain Louis Renault and Sherlock Holmes, Prince John and Sir Guy of Gisborne, plot to take over the country in Richard's absence. For Disney, it's the usual title card providing crusade context, then a twisted plot reveal that will confuse the heck out of everyone. The Earl of Huntingdon is Marion's father.
Isn't that daughter of mine ready to leave?
Aye, my lord. I have a...
Now, Huntingdon is preparing to join Richard on the Crusades. In summary, 2 of our 5 sample movies start before the crusade and 3 afterward. Now it gets even more difficult to follow. None of the movies follow the same timeline, locations, or events. And likewise, the legends were episodic, rarely connected to each other, except for the characters who were also inconsistent. And, as mentioned, the legends and the movies had little, if anything, to do with each other. Disney's flirty scene between Robin and Marian is the easiest to get rid of here, since it is so wrong on many accounts. First, making Marian the Earl's daughter is just ridiculous. Second, even allowing for the Richard Crusade's alternate history, she simply did not exist until much later on. However, there is a bit of truth, meaning a connection to the legends. According to some tales, Robin was the son of a forester, and the name Fitzooth pops up a couple of times, but not necessarily connected. Here, Robin's father is named Fitzooth, and appears to be a forester in the employ of the Earl. So maybe Disney's writers actually had a smattering of familiarity with the medieval tales. Even if you accept the Richard history as the real one, this movie is inaccurate. At the time the Crusades left for the Holy Land, Eleanor and John were in France. Richard did not leave John in charge, but the people who Richard did appoint ended up not working well together, so John had an opportunity to drive a wedge between them and take over. And contrary to everything you learned from the modern Robin Hood stories, King Richard was not a nice guy. He was French through and through and didn't like England. He only looked on the country as a piggy bank to finance his military campaigns. And Eleanor was a bit of a bitch as well. The rest of the sequence is just pure fantasy. Meanwhile, back in the silent era, the king's men are gearing up for a big tournament honoring the men who are leaving tomorrow for the crusade. The next 30-plus minutes of screen time don't advance the plot. They only provide a little bit of background material that we all already know, or introduce totally new and often irrelevant elements not seen elsewhere. Here's a warp speed summary. King Richard, Prince John, Maid Marian, Sir Guy of Gisborne, a bad guy, you can tell by his expression. The Earl of Huntingdon, good guy, as you can tell by the white plume. Huntingdon's squire, later to become Little John. Gisborne ties himself to the saddle to prevent being unhorsed in the joust. But despite cheating, Gisborne loses anyway. Now, to make an overly long story short, but not short enough, Huntingdon wins, receives the coronet from Marian, even though he is afeared of women, and is chased by every eligible young woman in the kingdom. Sorry, I couldn't resist. A great feast follows. Last chance for knights and their ladies to do knight and lady things. I believe the modern term is hook up. The king tries to play matchmaker for Huntingdon. Ties him up and again sets all the young women on him. Now this could get pretty kinky. He spies Marian being accosted by the drunken prince in Gisborne, breaks his bonds and sets off to save her. He gets the best of the prince in a war of words. Huntington and Marion gaze into each other's eyes and realize they are madly, passionately in love. That's Hollywood for you. Bright and early, the troops assemble. Richard gives a speech and the bishop gives a blessing. The king strides out of the hall. Looks more like a garden than battlements. Marion makes a drawing of Huntington's shadow. Whatever. Richard is still striding. Marion is still drawing. The tension mounts. Just kidding. Huntington has something he wants to give to Marion. A ring? But he's shy. He just stuffs it in her hand and hides behind his cape. She sees what it is and looks up at him in adoration and probably a little lust. They both kiss the hilt of his sword, some kind of bonding ritual, and they fade out, smiling. Richard stops striding and calls out for Huntington, which spooks the horses. The king calls for his horse while John and Gisborne look on in disdain. Huntington and Marion show up, and the king gives them his blessing. John and Gisborne are still plotting. And finally, the army is on the move. The first 32 minutes of this movie really don't have much to do with our story, other than supply a bit of background information. And remember, none of what you've just seen is in the original medieval stories, except the name Guy of Gisborne. But he was not the same character. So let's recap our 5 movie examples so far. Fairbanks has King Richard and his knights, including someone purporting to be Guy of Gisborne and someone calling himself the Earl of Huntington, setting off on the Third Crusade. I say calling himself because in 1190, when this version of the story is set, the real, live, flesh and blood Earl of Huntington was Prince David of Scotland. The title of Earl of Huntington resided with the Scottish royal family from 1157 to 1237. Prince John stayed at home and is about to devastate the country. In Flynn, Richard was on his way home from the crusade when he was captured by Leopold V, Duke of Austria, one of his many enemies, who turned him over to the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, who demanded a ransom of 150,000 marks, or roughly 100,000 pounds. Online calculators that I certainly can't vouch for suggest that's about $200 million today. Prince John and a different Guy of Gisborne are plotting to ransack the country. Disney more or less agrees with the Richard and the Crusaders leaving for the Holy Land line, with Huntington and the Sheriff of Nottingham. John stays behind, as always, with orders to appoint a new sheriff. No prizes for guessing how that's going to turn out. And there is no Gisborne. Thieves and Tights both begin long after Richard has left, but before he's ransomed and returned home. Neither mentions the Austrian imprisonment. So we still have a long time for the earlier films to catch up with the later ones. Well, it's time for a break. I'll see you again in a week or so, I hope. Thanks for watching. Now do all the usual stuff, which nobody ever does, so I don't know why I even mention it.